Okay, so here we are at communitymediadatabase.org.
We're going to go first to Massachusetts.
And we're going to take out the broadcast TV and non-commercial radio data points. And you can see here that Massachusetts, this is why we call it the promised land of community media, they have really very good coverage. And these yellow geo points, they represent public educational and government access and a community media center supporting that. And you can see they have it really way out, even out to Cape Cod.
Now let's move ahead to New Hampshire. New Hampshire has quite a lot. They were like New York once, but they managed to get a lot of government channels and a good spread of PEG channels. The only area where they don't have anything is the White Mountain National Forest, and we wouldn't want traffic there for PEG. Let's go to Vermont next, and you can see Vermont has full PEG over like the whole state, very equally spread out. And let's move on to Maine. As you can see, Maine has a lot of government and a good amount of the yellow, which are the prize points. They don't have anything up here, but you know, that's not a national forest up there, and most of their population is down here. See, who did we miss? Connecticut. Connecticut is doing better. They have a great concentration here and a lot of government, channels there. They have state franchising in Connecticut, a peculiar kind. So they have some weak areas, but compare them to New York, and we're really not as good. And you can see New York, these cool colors, these are educational channels which may or may not, be running full time or have any staff at all. See, down here in New York City area and Westchester, there's a really good amount of stations. However, even a lot of Long Island, where there's loads of people, doesn't have even a government channel. Here we are in Schenectady, and this is Scoped. But you can see up here in northern New York, there's a lot of nothing as far as government channels and public channels and even educational channels. And I guarantee you there are people up here. When you go to western New York, there is more development around Rochester and Buffalo and Lockport. The problem with New York is we have vast areas, maybe because of our geography, that are just uncovered. We have Schenectady, a nice jewel in the center, but really poor amount of PEG in New York State.
I'd say, frankly, I'm stunned. I would have thought that services and programming that you're enjoying here, and as we have in a portion of my district, was universal. So I would have thought there would have been a funding mechanism and a traditional way of entering into the community, and something that would give these programming channels staying power. So I'm frankly stunned at the paucity, the lack of availability of these services.
But Potsdam's not small, Binghamton's not small. I mean, these are not small places. I mean, I get it with the small ones, but Binghamton, nothing. It's terrible.
Yeah, so
and I understand a lot of it is state legislation. I understand it comparing to Massachusetts, which is what your point is. The state there really has set a different framework for the negotiations.
Some people say that the franchise fees may be declining, and that is true in some sections of New York, maybe not so much in Massachusetts where it's built out. But this changing technology that you speak of, Philip, it came to my attention since I sit on the Northeast Region Board. I get to hear the other states, and each of them has like a different system. In the state of Connecticut, there's a state franchising that's really not been very good for PEG. However, they instituted a fund that they call the PEG-PISA Fund. And for them, it's just for technology infrastructure, but it's a grant program. And they not only levy fees on cable, they levy it on satellite providers as well. So I said, wow, that's a fascinating precedent, and there's stuff about Pegpecia that there's problems with how it was set up. Sometimes the fund gets swept, but it replenishes at like $800,000 a quarter. And I'm sitting up there thinking, wow, that could pay for a lot of startups in New York. Even if it was just for equipment. But then I'm thinking farther that, if franchise fees are on the wane, we have to find these new technologies and find ways for New York State to tax them, if you will, make them pay fees to do business in New York State, which not franchise fees, but just fees that, just like Connecticut did, that we're going to make this fee, and that could possibly take over the one stream of funding as it wanes. So as more people go over to IP transmission or whatever we're taxing, if you have a whole bunch of video channels, 500 video channels, and it's not coming, off a cable, that's a video provider, and that time to pay into community media, the cost of community media. Because in 1934, when that law was made about the franchise fees, that's when cable was wiring, and that was the agreement in exchange for wiring all these areas. You're going to have to kick in these franchise fees, and that was the intended funding stream for community media. It goes all to community media in Massachusetts, but not very much, in New York. But I think it's time to try and study other ways to phase in other funds, and if cable is paying a lot, then maybe they should pay much less into that fund and make it more fair, because technology has moved on since 1934. Let's face it. There's other ways of getting video to consumers, and the responsibility that was originally intended in the Communications Act of 1934 is, that should help pay for our community access and should be treated more equally as it was then. It's not very equal now.
So I do have a question. So in terms of those other states, so they're relying on the same basic model. Everyone's relying on franchise fees. Is that accurate, or are there some other?
There's some that are state franchising. Vermont has state franchising now, but they traditionally gave a huge chunk, if not all, to community media. But I've heard of state franchising tends to be bad for public educational government access. California, it just wiped out half the stations. But of the state franchises that I've heard, Vermont has a much better system, and a large chunk goes to the PEG, and they used that money to fiber network their whole state. That's why you saw all those geo points of the yellow. Those little bitty towns, they have transmission that was paid for by the state. So they did things as well as you can do it probably in a state franchise.
Yeah, because that's what I was intrigued by, because and you see it in the households, and it started with the young people, of course, tuning out at cable and watching programming, streaming, on the internet. And so the demand, of course, is for cell towers and fiber optic. So to the extent that, and you seem very aggressive with this, that you're using those other forms of media other than cable TV, because much of our area, Vermont, is very much like the district I serve. I have a 7-county region, Southern Tier, Northern Catskills, very mountainous Northern Appalachia, and people are calling for internet. They're calling for broadband. They're calling for not just for video content, but for economic development, for tourism, for all of those reasons. So.
Yeah, I wonder if the governor's broadband proposal, with a lot of money to go to distribute broadband, has some opportunity in it. If there's a window for you guys to think about, as broadband gets expanded to more places, can there be a way for that to include support for and the development of growing public access, local community-based access.
Right. So in my district, again, Scopeg in particular, and then in Ulster County, Saugerties Lighthouse TV, and it's totally local content, and it's totally local issues, local programming, and it enjoys quite a bit of popularity with the community. But the limitation, traditionally up till now, has been getting it through cable, because not everyone has cable, and the barriers for installing fiber optic and getting cable connections has been a long-standing issue in rural areas. So So to the extent that we can stream it wirelessly, to the extent that we can stream it through expansion of broadband and broadband networks, you got the gears running, I think.
Right,
Yeah.
and the money's going to be there, and the state's going to be spending it to grow out capacity.
Yeah.
And I think, to your point, community access now is a lot different than it was. So expanding the broadband, I think, is a key element. And seeing that initiative start to take place in the state, I think there is an opportunity now to say, all right, how can we, take advantage of this and expand community, public access as well to these areas. And I have Montgomery County, which is facing the same problem. And I think that you may find that these areas, the rural areas, are the areas that are lacking, and it's not because of that people don't want it. It's just that there's more to overcome in order to.
Just like there are food deserts in cities, there are absolutely internet cable deserts in cities. We have CapRep in Albany. It's in a place where we cannot get a good continuous signal.
Right.
Just interesting. I'm sorry.
I was going to say that one of the problems that we've faced is the number of households required for expansion of service on the cable system.
Right.
And when we have the requirement is 25.
The base is 35, but in your communities you negotiated it down to 25.
25. Right. But even that locks out many people who would like to have the service. Well, if we can get the service on the internet, that's one way to go, but everyone should be involved in paying for the service.
We tried to put forth the Community Access Preservation Act in the last several years in Congress. And what that called for was that every state would be required to have a portion of those franchise fees, of the 5%, 2% must go minimum to, public educational and government access. Not 100, just 40%. But what held it up is every state had a different system, a different structure. So it got thrown back into the court of the states. So that's why I'm here trying to speak for. Maybe it's time for New York State to come up with some minimum like that, 40% or what have you, to assure that areas that have to start up a channel can start it up with equipment one year, staff it the next year, and ongoing, do that. And Massachusetts, previous to that, only had like a letter of opinion from their version of the Public Service Commission, their telecommunications, saying that it's understood that franchise fees should go to community media. And that's all that they were running on. And when the word came back that the states are on their own, you have to get your own legislation, boom, last year they put in a law. Now it's the law of the land, not an opinion. So, Massachusetts is leading the way. Maybe we have to ask for much less or phase it in, because our towns and municipalities are used to having a lot of this money to balance their budget with.
It's sort of a chicken and egg thing, because once communities have it, they love it, they want it, they support it. But it's getting that seed money, that initial impetus, and also finding people within the community that are going to be driving forces behind it. Because let's face it, getting something like this off the ground takes effort, takes commitment, takes sustained. It's a sustained process in order to get these things off the ground.
Right.
And but it's true. Once they're in place, people see the value of it, and even the companies begin to see a value of it once it's in place. But before that time,
well, in fact, that was one of our arguments as we were negotiating with Time Warner the transfer to Proctor's. That we would make them proud, and we would give them a leg up on satellite. And I've tried to get them to say yes to that, and they can't quite. But I know it's true. I know it's true, because they have good local content on this station, and they wouldn't. And if you have a satellite, you don't have it.
the linchpin in Massachusetts seems to be that the franchise, at least from the point of view of seed money, the franchise fee monies are required to be used for cable-related purposes,
No.
which is not a requirement in New York at this point. In New York, many of those funds go into the general fund. And I don't know, you would know more about obviously the mood of the legislature, but do you see any way that the legislature would look at that as a serious change in the law to require local communities to use their franchise fees for cable-related purposes?
Well, I think it's certainly worth discussion. I haven't heard discussions about it, but it's given what we're talking about here and what we'd like to accomplish, I think it's certainly worthy of a discussion to figure out how other states have been successful and how we can follow. Like I said, there's no sense in reinventing the wheel. Follow a model that has worked, and perhaps it could work here. I think there's a couple of getting information to people is the big the biggest hurdle. We got to get the information out there, but I think this broadband initiative is going to be a part of that, giving people access to the technology. And it's, I think it's critical technology, just as important as telephone lines once were. This is just as important to get the rest of New York access to high-speed broadband, and that's going to give you access to so much information, and it's another way to sort of move in that direction. And I think that's certainly worthy of discussion to couple up with public access and the broadband together.
I think it's time for legislators in New York to really study this. Actually, there were a few legislators who couldn't be here today, and they gave me a clip, and some of them have been thinking about this for a while. So maybe there's hope. Let me play you that clip.
My name is Assemblyman Kevin Cahill. I represent the 103rd Assembly District here in Ulster and Dutchess counties. The demise of the community newspaper, the loss of community local news radio has caused our communities to fragment. One of the places we can see that glue put our communities back together is by creating good community access media. We need to come up with means to assure its growth and its perpetuation. We need to make sure that we bring some professionalization to the realm so that it's not just left to volunteers. There's a lot of work to be done. We think that starting with some legislation that would provide a fiscal infrastructure for this, starting with some legislation that would provide some minimum standards to assure that what is being called community access is indeed community access, is another good place to start. But the most important place to start is to get the spirit of the community involved. In those parts of my district where we have vital public access television, it's because the community is involved. It's because the individuals in the community have decided to take up the cause.
Do you think the channel placement and speed of accessibility should be equal with commercial television?
Absolutely. The franchise that we give a cable television system, or the ability for our satellite systems to change the landscape of our neighborhoods, should come at a price. And that price is that they should be supporting community access television, at least to the same extent that they're supporting things like shopping networks and unique channels for very particular interests, and as well the large broadcasting networks. If we're going to talk about sustaining something for the future, we can't put all of our chips in the cable basket. More and more people are migrating away from what we call conventional cable into the other media. And if we want to find a way to make sure that this is around even in as soon as 5 years, we had better make sure that the funding stream recognizes that changing technology and the changing tastes of the general public.
Hi, I'm Sandy Galiff, a New York State Assemblywoman from the 95th Assembly District, which is part of northern Westchester and part of Putnam County. And I'm a big promoter of PEG. It's just an important part of our media. It's important to keep PEG, our public access, our educational channels, and our government channel. And we need to have a separate one for each one because there really is enough programming for all of those. That's where the public has to say, look, we expect this of our government. We want our government to be, taped. I think there should be a minimum standard because I think it's important. It's really transparency in government and what's going on.
Well, first of all, thank you. I appreciate this opportunity to be with you today. I'm Chris Gibson. I represent the 19th District, for New York State in the United States Congress. And I appreciate the group that's come together today because, I think community access broadcasting is essential to revitalizing our democracy. A lot of what I fight for in Washington is for the renaissance of self-governing, and that really means empowering people. And what I appreciate about what you do is you feel passionate about transparency, about having information available, about showcasing community. So when I think about public education and government, and I think about what community broadcasting contributes to that, I see that as essential part of our future.